My name is Farid Bakshari, and before I tell you anything else, I need you to know one thing about me. I did not come from a poor family. I did not grow up with nothing and build myself up from the bottom. No, my story is different. I was a man who had more money than he needed, more respect than he deserved, and more emptiness inside him than he ever let anyone see. I was dying slowly, every single day, behind walls that cost more money than most families will ever hold in their whole life. I had a house in Isfahan with a garden so big I sometimes did not walk to the far end of it for weeks. I had cars in my garage that I forgot I owned. I had drivers, cooks, guards, assistants, people whose whole job was to think about what I might need before I even asked. I had everything a man could want in this world, and I want you to really hear me when I say this. I had nothing that actually mattered. Not one thing. The night my daughter did not come home, I sat on the edge of my bed, a bed that probably cost more than most people's cars, and I cried like a small child, not because I was sad in the normal way. I had felt sadness before, many times. I cried because in that moment I understood something terrible. I was one of the most powerful men in my city, and I could not do one single thing to protect my own child. All my years of building, pushing, winning, none of it meant anything that night. Something broke in me that money could never repair, but I am going ahead of myself. Let me slow down and go back to where this all started, because if you want to understand how I ended up crying on the floor of a small apartment in Dubai, speaking to a God I had been taught my whole life was not the real God, you need to know where I came from first. I was born in 1971 in Isfahan, Iran. If you know this city, you know it is not just any city. People call it half of the world because of its beauty, its old bridges, its blue mosques with tiles that shine even on a cloudy day. I grew up breathing that history. Faith was not something we chose. It was just there, the same way the sky was there. It was in the call to prayer at dawn. It was in the smell of my mother's kitchen during Ramadan. It was in the way my father folded his hands before he opened the Quran. It was in the way my grandmother covered her face slightly when men passed her in the street out of habit, not fear. My father, Riza Bakshari, was a merchant. Carpets mostly, but also other goods, whatever moved well between cities. He was not the kind of man who sat quietly behind a counter. He traveled. He negotiated. He understood something that most people never understand, that value is not fixed. A carpet that means nothing in one town can be worth 10 times more in another town if you know how to move it there and who to sell it to. He told me this many times when I was a boy. He used to say, Farid, the man who understands movement is the man who understands power. Sitting still is for people who are satisfied with little. My mother, Nasrin, was almost the opposite of him. She was quiet. She read books that most people in our neighborhood had never heard of. She prayed in a way I did not understand as a boy but understand very well now. She did not just recite words. She spoke to God like he was sitting across from her in the kitchen. Sometimes while she cooked, I would hear her whispering things, and sometimes she would cry while she prayed, but it was not a sad kind of crying. It was something else, something I could not name back then. She used to tell me, Farid, everything we have is only lent to us. The bread on our table, the coins your father earns, even the air we breathe. We are only guests here for a short time. We do not own anything. I would nod when she said this because I loved her and I respected her, but honestly I did not believe her. I thought she was just being a good, humble, religious woman, the way religious women are supposed to be. I believed my father's version of the world more. Work hard, take what you can, and the strongest man ends up with the most. I chose my father's path, and for a very long time, it seemed to work perfectly. By 19, I was already traveling with my father, learning how deals were made, learning how to sit across from men twice my age and make them feel like they had won, when actually I had gotten exactly what I wanted. I had something people called a gift. My father used to joke that I could sell sand to a man standing in the desert. When the economy in Iran began to shift and grow after the difficult years, I noticed opportunities that other men were too slow or too afraid to take. I moved away from carpets into construction supplies. Steel, cement, glass, the things a growing country needs in huge amounts. Isfahan was expanding, new roads, new buildings, new everything, and I made sure my name was tied to almost all of it. I was 33 years old the day I crossed from being a comfortable man into being a genuinely rich one. I signed a contract with a large government housing project, worth more money than my father had earned in his entire life combined. I remember sitting in that government office, papers signed, when the official across the table shook my hand and called me Mr. Bakshari with real respect in his voice. Something moved in my chest that day. It was not happiness exactly. It felt more like hunger, like I had tasted something new, and now I needed much more of it forever. That hunger controlled the next 18 years of my life. By my mid-40s, I had built something that I can only call an empire. I mean that word seriously. I had companies in Isfahan, Tehran, and Shiraz. I had business partners in Turkey and in the Gulf countries. I owned apartment buildings, office towers, warehouses, trucks, and land in places I sometimes forgot I owned. Hundreds of people depended on me for their monthly salary. I had bank accounts in different countries, in different currencies. Once, at a dinner in Vienna, I realized the two men sitting beside me were people I had read about in international business news, and they were speaking to me like an equal, because I was one. From the outside, Farid Bakshari looked like the definition of success. My clothes, my restaurants, my cars, the confident way I spoke about my projects like every success was obvious from the start. I was very good at performing that role. But underneath that performance, something was happening that nobody could see, something I did not even let myself look at directly most days. I had been married twice before I turned 40. My first wife, Manas, was intelligent and warm, the kind of woman who remembered small details about people, who made everyone around her feel noticed. We were married for 7 years. She left me after telling me more than once that she felt like she lived in a beautiful cage. She said, "Farid, you take care of everything except me. You give me everything except yourself." She was right, and I knew it even then. I was never actually home. Even when my body was in the room, my mind was somewhere else. In a meeting, on a phone call, planning the next move. She needed a husband. What she got was more like a generous business partner who occasionally slept in the same bed. My second marriage lasted 4 years. My wife, Parisa, was younger, and I think she fell in love with the idea of me more than the actual me. When she discovered what living with me was really like, she did not hide her disappointment. She told me once, very calmly, that she had longer conversations with my assistant in 1 week than she had with me in an entire month. That sentence stayed in me for years, not because it changed my behavior right away, but because it was completely true and I still did nothing about it. I had 2 children, a son from Manas and a daughter from Parisa. I'm not proud of the kind of father I was to either of them. I was the type of father who arrived with expensive gifts and left before the celebration was even finished, because something urgent had come up. I was the kind of father whose children learned, slowly and quietly, not to expect me. That is a painful thing for a child to learn, that their own father is someone you should not count on. My daughter, Sarah, the youngest from my second marriage, was 22 years old when everything in my life split into a before and an after. She had been studying in Tehran, living somewhat independently, and I had been sending her money every month without really asking many questions about her life. I checked her bank transfers. I asked her mother for updates sometimes. I did not ask Sarah how she was actually feeling, not in any real way. I did not notice, or maybe I did not want to notice, that something in her life had gone very wrong. She had fallen into a relationship with a group of people who were involved in things I would rather not describe in detail here. Not just bad friends. Dangerous people, people who lend money, who offer favors, and who later expect much more back than what they gave, in ways that are not gentle at all. I found out on a Tuesday night. My phone rang close to midnight. It was Sarah. Her voice sounded like someone standing at the very edge of something extremely high. She told me what had happened. She told me how deep the trouble went. She told me that men had come to where she was staying and told her she had 10 days to fix the situation or things would get very bad for her. I will not pretend I was calm. I was far from calm. I drove from Isfahan to Tehran that same night, and I do not remember feeling the hours pass because my mind was completely occupied by one single thought over and over. My daughter was in danger, real danger, and I did not know. She was living her life 2 hours away from me, drowning, and I had no idea. I fixed the immediate problem. That part, honestly, was not difficult. Money solves many kinds of problems, and I had plenty of it. I paid what needed to be paid. I brought her back closer to home. I arranged for people to watch over her more carefully. But the thing that could not be fixed with any amount of money was what happened inside me on that drive back from Tehran, alone, in the dark. I tried to remember the last real conversation I had with Sarah, not a quick phone call, A real conversation, the kind where you look at someone and ask a genuine question and actually wait to hear the answer. I could not remember one, not in years. I remembered sending her money. I remembered short messages checking on her studies. I remembered sitting across from her at a family dinner for maybe 30 minutes before taking an urgent call. I could not remember looking my own daughter in the eyes and asking her simply, "How are you really doing?" That thought sat inside my chest like a heavy stone, and it did not move. It was there the next morning. It was there weeks later. It was there during an important business meeting in Tehran, while a man discussed numbers and projections with me, and I was nodding along, but my mind was somewhere else entirely, thinking about how my own daughter had been suffering for who knows how long, while I had been reviewing spreadsheets about my companies instead of actually seeing her. I went back to praying more seriously after that. I had always prayed 5 times a day or close to it. I fasted during Ramadan properly. I gave more charity than was even required of me. Nobody around me could point to any obvious flaw in my religious practice, but after that night, I started praying differently. I stopped only reciting the correct words in the correct order. I started asking real questions. Why do I feel so empty? I have everything and I have nothing. What is wrong with me? What am I missing? Why does my life feel like a beautiful house from the outside, but when you actually step inside, there is nothing there except walls? I visited a respected religious teacher in Isfahan, a man people traveled long distances just to receive guidance from. I sat in his study and told him about the emptiness, though I did not use that exact word because I was too embarrassed. I was Farid Bakshari. I could not simply sit in front of this man and admit I was falling apart inside. So I described it carefully, using safer words. I said my faith felt dry lately. I said my prayers felt like a routine, not a real connection. I said I gave and felt nothing return to me. He was a kind man. He listened patiently. Then he said the things I somewhat expected him to say. He said this emptiness was a test from God. He said patience was the answer. He told me to increase my prayers, read more, give more charity, perhaps go on another pilgrimage. He said my reward was coming, just not yet. Later, I thanked him, I drove home, and I felt absolutely nothing change inside me. That was the part I could never explain to anyone around me. I was doing everything correctly, by every measure people around me could see, and still feeling nothing. Not one small piece of peace. Not one moment where I felt truly heard by whatever was above me. I was completely alone, in the middle of the busiest, most crowded life a person could have. About 10 months after everything with Sarah, I had business meetings scheduled in Dubai. This was normal for me. I traveled there often for property investments and partnerships. I had visited Dubai many times before, and honestly, I usually enjoyed it. I checked into my hotel near the marina. Nice room, tall glass windows, a view of the water and the boats below. I had dinner with my partners the first evening, then 2 full days of meetings after that. The meetings went well, as expected. Deals were moving forward the way they were supposed to move. On the 3rd day, my schedule finished earlier than planned. My business partners invited me to join them for dinner on a yacht that evening. I said no. Honestly, I did not fully understand why I said no. I simply did not want to be around people that night. I wanted to walk somewhere alone, without any real destination. I left the hotel and walked without any map, just moving through streets, past restaurants, past small shops with bright signs, past groups of young people laughing near a fountain, past an old man selling roasted nuts from a small cart. I walked until I genuinely did not recognize where I was anymore, which is not an easy thing to do in a city built the way Dubai is built, but somehow I managed it. I ended up near a smaller, older part of the city, close to the water, where the buildings looked less new, less polished. There was a quiet area with benches facing the water, where a few people sat watching the boats pass slowly in the evening light. I sat down on one of those benches. It was not a special place, just an ordinary bench in a city where I did not live. A man was sitting on the next bench, not directly beside me, with some space between us. He looked like he might be from the Philippines, or maybe Indonesia. I could not tell for certain. He wore simple work clothes, the kind you wear after a long shift of physical labor. He was not young, maybe close to 60. His face had deep lines, the kind that come from years spent working outdoors. He was eating something simple from a small plastic container, and he was reading something too, a small book with a soft, worn cover, reading it slowly, like every line deserved his full attention. His face is what stopped me from simply looking away. He looked peaceful, not the loud kind of happy that people show when something exciting just happened to them, something much steadier than that, something that did not seem to depend on anything happening around him at all. Here was a man eating a very simple dinner in a public place alone, and he looked more settled inside himself than I had felt in over 20 years. I watched him for a while, longer than was probably polite. I am not usually someone who starts conversations with strangers. Normally, people approach me. I have assistants who arrange things for me, who manage situations so I never have to. I do not simply walk over and sit beside people I do not know. But that evening, I stood up and moved to the same bench where he was sitting. I sat at the far end and I said hello. He looked up slowly. His eyes were calm, unbothered. He answered me in careful English. His name was Ramon. He had been living and working in Dubai for almost 9 years, in construction, sending money home every month to his wife and 2 children in the Philippines. He spoke to his family whenever he could afford the time and the phone credit. I asked what he was reading. He held the small book up slowly, watching my face closely as he did it. It was a Bible. I want to be completely honest about what happened inside me in that exact moment. My first reaction was the one I had been trained my whole life to have. A small alarm went off somewhere inside me. A voice, like every religious teacher I had ever had, saying, "This is wrong, this book has been changed, this is not the real truth, be careful." I had been taught since childhood that the Bible had been altered by people over time, that the true, unchanged message was only found in the Quran, but something else happened too at the same time. Something underneath that alarm. A kind of quiet pulling, like when you catch a smell from far away and you cannot name it, but your body wants to move closer anyway. I did not walk away. I asked him what he was reading exactly. He looked at me for a moment, thinking, then he said, "Someone named Jesus said something today that I really needed to hear." I asked him what it was. He opened the Bible to a page marked with a small folded receipt. He read slowly, in careful English. "Come to me, all you who are tired and carrying heavy loads, and I will give you rest." Then he closed the book gently and looked back out at the water. I did not say anything for a moment. I just sat with those words, "Come to me, I will give you rest." I asked him, "Do you actually believe that? Do you believe those words are really true?" He turned to look at me with those steady, calm eyes, and he said, "I know they are true, because I used to be one of the most broken men I knew before Jesus, and now I am sitting here with very little money, very far from my family, and I am not broken anymore." He told me a little of his story, not the whole thing, just enough. He said he had spent years angry at almost everyone and everything. He said he had left his family in a difficult place when he first came to work in Dubai. He had not been a good husband from far away, and he knew it. One evening, a co-worker, also from the Philippines, invited him to a small gathering in someone's small apartment room. He said he only went because he had nothing else to do that night, and he was tired of sitting alone. He said the people there sang some quiet songs, and someone read from the Bible, and then everyone prayed together. He said the praying was different from anything he had heard before. It did not sound like reciting memorized words. It sounded like people speaking to someone they genuinely knew, someone they believed was truly present in the room with them. He said he sat quietly in the corner, feeling almost nothing for most of the evening. But near the end, one man prayed out loud for anyone in the room who was tired, who was far from home, who felt like they had failed the people who depended on them. Ramon said he did not understand how that man knew the exact right words to say, but it felt, he said, like someone had looked directly into him and said, "I see you." And then the man added that Jesus sees you too, and that Jesus is the only one who has ever loved anyone without any condition attached at all. Ramon said something shifted in his chest that night. He said it felt like a door opened somewhere inside him that he did not even know existed. He said he started crying and could not stop for a long time. He said he quietly asked Jesus to forgive him, to help him, to become real to him if he truly was real. And something changed. Nothing changed on the outside. Same job, same small shared room, same distance from his family, but something inside him had settled. He said, "I cannot explain it better than this. I just know I am different now. I know something is living inside me that was not there before, and that thing is peace, real peace, not the peace you feel only when life is going well, the peace that stays even when life is very hard." I sat on that bench with this man for almost an hour. I forgot about the meetings from earlier. I forgot about the deals I had been thinking through in my head all week. I forgot for a little while about the entire life I had built, I simply sat there. When I finally stood up to leave, Ramon tore a small piece of paper from the back margin of his Bible. He wrote something on it using a pen from his shirt pocket. He handed it to me and said, "Read this tonight when it is quiet." I took it. I thanked him. I walked back toward my hotel slowly, thinking about almost nothing else. That night, I sat alone in my hotel room. The water outside my window was dark, boats moving slowly with small lights on them. I had poured myself a glass of water and sat in the chair near the window, and eventually I reached into my jacket pocket and took out the small paper Ramon had given me. He had written the same words he had read to me earlier. "Come to me, all you who are tired and carrying heavy loads, and I will give you rest." Below it, he had written the reference, Matthew chapter 11, verse 28. I read it twice. I set the paper down on the small table beside the chair. I looked out at the water for a long time. I thought about Mana's telling me she felt like she lived in a beautiful cage. I thought about Parisa saying she spoke to my assistant more than she spoke to me. I thought about Sarah's voice on the phone that night, sounding like someone standing at the very edge of something extremely high. I thought about all the prayers I had said over the years that seemed to go up and simply never come back down to me. I thought about sitting in that respected teacher's study, leaving with exactly the same emptiness I had walked in with. I thought about standing at my own window at home, late at night, in complete quiet, asking myself why everything around me felt like it was made of thin paper, looking real from far away, but completely hollow the moment you pressed on it. I was tired. I did not fully understand how tired I was until I sat there in that chair with that small paper in my hand and finally admitted it honestly to myself. I was not tired from work. I was tired from carrying something with no name, something I had carried for so long that I had stopped noticing its weight. But it was there. It had always been there. And nobody, until that moment, had ever offered to take it from me. "Come to me. I will give you rest." I did not plan what happened after that. It was not something I thought through or prepared myself for. I simply slid down from the chair onto the floor, not because I lost my balance. I went down the way a person goes down when they cannot stand up under something any longer, when something inside them simply gives way. I pressed my forehead against the carpet of that hotel room, and quietly, I said the name I had been taught my entire life was not the right name to call on. I said it softly, Jesus. And then I said everything else that was inside me. I said, "I do not know if you are real. I have been told my whole life that you are not who your followers claim you are. I have been told your book was changed by men. I have been told you were simply a prophet and nothing beyond that. But right now I am on the floor of a hotel room in Dubai, and I am more alone than I have ever felt in my entire life. And earlier today I met a man who has almost nothing, and somehow he has something I have never had, not once in 50 years. So if you truly are who he says you are, please show me, because I have nothing left to try. I have done everything I know how to do, and I am still completely empty. I am so tired. Please, if you are real, give me what you gave to him." I stayed there on the floor for a long while. The room was very quiet. Far below, I could hear the faint sound of traffic and the low hum of the city continuing on without me. And then something happened that I still find difficult to fully explain in words. I will try, even though I know the words will not be enough. I felt warmth. It began somewhere in my chest and slowly spread outward, not like the warmth from a heater or a blanket wrapped around me, something that came from somewhere inside, not outside. And along with that warmth came another feeling, one I can only describe as being fully known. Every part of me, the parts I usually showed to people, and the parts I kept hidden from everyone, including myself, felt completely known by whatever was happening in that room, and completely accepted anyway, despite everything. I have done things in my life that I am not proud of, business decisions that were not fair to people who trusted me. People I treated more like tools than human beings. Years of ignoring my own children while I chased the next deal. 2 marriages that fell apart because I cared more about building an empire than caring for the people living inside it with me. I became fully aware of every one of those things in that single moment, on that floor, all of it present at once. And still, the warmth did not leave. The acceptance did not leave. It felt as though everything I had done wrong was completely known and completely covered by something I had never earned and could never earn on my own. I cried. Not the quiet, controlled kind of crying. The kind that rises up from somewhere so deep inside you that it takes you by surprise. I cried for Sarah, and for all the years I was not truly present for her. I cried for Manas and for Parisa. I cried for every prayer that had felt like speaking into an empty wall. I cried for the man I had been, running so fast, for so long, without ever really understanding what I was running toward. And in the middle of all that, I sensed something, not with my physical ears, somewhere else deeper than that. It felt as though something gently made clear to me, without any harsh words, that he had been present the entire time, that everything I had ever built had ultimately come from him, and that it was never given to me only for my own sake. I lay on that floor for a long time afterward. When I finally sat up again, the room looked exactly the same as before. The window, the chair, the half-empty glass of water, everything unchanged. But I was not the same person who had originally sat down in that chair earlier that evening. I knew it immediately, without any doubt. Something fundamental inside me had shifted, like a bone that had been out of place for years finally settling back where it belonged. I looked at my own reflection in the dark glass of the window, and quietly I said out loud to myself, Jesus is real. Returning to my normal life in Isfahan afterward was one of the hardest things I have ever had to do. The flight itself was simple enough. What was difficult was walking back into my everyday life, carrying what I now knew inside me. Iran is not a place where you casually mention that you have given your life to Jesus. It is not a country where faith outside of Islam is treated as a private, personal matter people simply tolerate. There are very clear, serious consequences for Muslims who leave Islam. That word is apostasy, and the consequences attached to it are not something distant or theoretical. I went back to my normal routine. Meetings, phone calls, contracts, the ordinary business of continuing to be Farid Bakshari. I still attended Friday prayers at the mosque near my home, because suddenly stopping would immediately raise questions I was not yet ready to answer. I stood in the rows with the other men, I bowed, I stood again, I recited the correct words with my mouth, while my heart was quietly having an entirely different conversation underneath. That contradiction hurt. Every single Friday, I felt like I was lying to everyone standing around me. But I was not ready yet to stop, because stopping meant facing consequences I had not yet figured out how to survive. I needed to learn more. I needed to understand who Jesus truly was, beyond one intense night on a hotel room floor. I needed a Bible of my own, and I needed other people who understood what I was going through. I traveled back to Dubai about a month later. I told my office it was for business, and that part was not entirely false. But my real reason for going was Ramon. I had kept the small paper he gave me tucked inside my wallet, between two other cards, where nobody would ever notice it. I found him again by asking around near where we had met, until someone recognized my description and pointed me toward a construction site nearby. I waited near the gate at the end of his shift. When he stepped out and saw me standing there, his face did something I will never forget. He smiled, like he had somehow been expecting me all along. We sat together at a small tea stall nearby. I told him everything that had happened after we parted. When I finished, he closed his eyes for a moment, and I believe he was quietly praying. When he opened them again, he said, "Brother, I have been praying for you every single day since that bench. I told God you were worth going after. I told him I needed a Bible in Farsi. I told him I needed to understand more clearly what I had experienced and what it actually meant to truly follow Jesus while living in a place like Iran." He said he knew people who could help. What he connected me to was something I had never known existed in any organized way. There were small, scattered groups of believers spread across Isfahan, Tehran, and other Iranian cities. People who had come to faith in Jesus through dreams, through the internet, through unexpected encounters, through satellite channels broadcasting Christian programs into Iran from outside the country. They gathered quietly in apartments and private homes, always in secrecy. They called themselves house groups, though never in any message or conversation that could later be traced back to them. Ramon connected me with a man named Vartan, an Armenian Iranian Christian who had grown up in a Christian household in Tehran, which was legally permitted, since Armenian Christians are officially recognized as a religious minority in Iran. But Vartan also quietly worked with people like me, Iranians from Muslim backgrounds who had come to faith with no community, no resources, and no safe way to grow further in what they now believed. Vartan was cautious the first time we spoke, using an encrypted messaging app. He asked me many careful questions. He was not being rude. He was being responsible. He had personally seen what happened when the wrong person discovered these small groups. People arrested. People losing their jobs overnight. Families separated without warning. He needed real assurance that I was genuine before trusting me with anything further. After several careful conversations, he finally agreed to meet me in person, in a quiet cafe in Isfahan, somewhere I was never usually seen. He was a quiet, careful man, around 40 years old, with a stillness about him that I was slowly beginning to recognize as something connected to the faith I was trying to understand. He handed me a New Testament printed in Farsi, on very thin paper, small enough to fit discreetly inside the cover of an ordinary notebook. I brought it home that night, and from then on, I read it quietly every night after everyone else in my house had gone to sleep. I read it with the same intense focus I used to give only to contracts and financial reports. Every line, every story, every single word attributed to Jesus changed something in me that I was not prepared for. Reading the Gospels was nothing like what I had expected. I had always been told the Bible was corrupted, unreliable, changed by human hands over time. But reading it slowly for myself, what I actually found was a Jesus completely unlike the softened, distant version I had been presented with throughout my religious education. He revealed things through those pages that no ordinary teacher or respected prophet would ever say about himself. He made claims about his own identity that were direct and absolute. There was no comfortable middle position offered anywhere in those pages, and the way he treated people that everyone else had already given up on. The woman the crowd wanted to stone, the despised tax collector working for the occupying government, the sick, the outsiders, the ones religious leaders of that time had already decided were too far gone to matter. He moved toward every single one of them. He did not wait for anyone to clean themselves up first. That was the part that broke something open in me every single time I read it. He did not wait for me to become worthy first. He came to me exactly where I was, on the floor of that hotel room, after 50 years of pride, self-building, and completely missing the point of everything. He came anyway. Through Vartan, I was eventually connected to a small house group in Isfahan. Sometimes 6 people, sometimes 8. We met in different apartments each time, to avoid any noticeable pattern. The host changed regularly. Phones were always left in a separate room. We kept our voices low, always below a certain volume. And in that small, quiet room, surrounded by those particular people, I experienced something I had never once experienced inside any mosque I had entered in my entire life. I felt like I was finally in the right place. These were people from very different backgrounds. A school teacher, a mechanic, a young woman who worked in a small shop nearby, a retired government worker who had served for over 25 years before Jesus found him too. None of us had any obvious reason to be sitting in the same room together, and yet somehow we were exactly the same underneath. We had all been found by the same person. We were all quietly carrying the same new thing inside us, a steady warmth that simply did not fade away. I slowly began using my money the same way I always had, strategically, but now for entirely different purposes. I quietly paid rent in advance for 2 small apartments used as meeting places for different house groups. I arranged this in ways that could never be traced back to me directly. I helped fund the careful printing and distribution of Farsi New Testaments. Through a network Vartan helped me understand slowly over time. I also set up a private fund that Vartan could access to help families who had been discovered, families who suddenly needed to leave quickly, who needed money for an unplanned journey, who needed help the state would never offer them, and sometimes even their own relatives would not offer, out of fear or shame. I also began doing something I had genuinely never done in my entire business life. I started truly paying attention to the people working for me. I had always known their names. I had always signed their monthly salaries without a second thought. But I had never actually seen them as full human beings, with entire lives existing outside of what they did for my companies. I started asking small, simple questions. How is your family doing? Did your son recover well from his surgery? Is your mother feeling any better these days? Very small things, but the expressions on people's faces when I asked were not small at all. They looked like people who had never expected to be truly seen by me. I cannot honestly tell you this transformed my business in any measurable way. That was never really the point. The point is, it slowly transformed me. Every single time I genuinely looked at someone who worked for me, I thought of Ramon, sitting on that bench, having very little in this world, and yet completely at peace. And I thought carefully about what exactly made that difference in him. For almost 3 years, I lived this quiet, divided life, running my companies during the day, reading my Bible late at night, meeting with my house group whenever it was safe enough to do so, quietly funding whatever I safely could without drawing dangerous attention toward myself or others. But something was steadily growing inside me during those 3 years, a kind of pressure, a growing sense that I was holding something contained that was actually meant to be released outward. Every time I heard about a believer who had been discovered and was suffering because of it, every time I read about people across Iran having strange, vivid dreams of Jesus with no one at all to help them understand what they were experiencing, every time I sat quietly in that small room with my brothers and sisters in faith and felt how real what we shared together truly was, I thought about all the countless others who had nothing like what we had. I thought again about what my mother used to tell me, that we are only visitors passing through this life, only holding things briefly for a short while. I had been holding a great deal for a very long while, and I was slowly beginning to understand that I was being asked to do something significant with all of it. T. The final decision did not arrive all at once. It came together slowly, over many months, through prayer and long conversations with Vartan and Ramon, whom I stayed in regular contact with throughout this period. It came from reading certain passages in the New Testament over and over, passages describing what it truly means to acknowledge Jesus openly in front of other people, and what it means, in contrast, to remain silent out of fear when speaking is actually what is needed most. There was one line I simply could not move past, no matter how many times I read around it. It described how anyone ashamed of him would eventually find him ashamed of them in return. I read that line and thought, I am not ashamed of Jesus, not anymore, but I am extremely hidden, and staying hidden for genuine safety reasons is one thing. Staying hidden forever, purely out of fear, is something else entirely. I traveled to Dubai again in the early part of last year, officially for business meetings, and that part was true. But while I was there, I quietly arranged, through contacts inside that same underground network, to meet with people connected to an organization that helps persecuted Christians safely share their stories with the wider world. Most of their work involves carefully protecting people's identities, blurring faces, changing names entirely. But they also occasionally worked with people who had made a very different choice, people who had already calculated the full cost and had decided in advance that they were willing to pay it. I told them plainly that I wanted to be one of the second kind. The man I spoke with, a Lebanese Christian who had been doing this particular work for well over a decade, looked at me for a long moment after I said that. He asked, do you fully understand what this means for everything you currently hold in Iran? He asked if I had any real plan for where I would go afterward once this became public knowledge. I told him I was still working on that part. He said, we can give you more time if you need it. You do not have to do this immediately. Think it through very carefully first. I told him I had already been thinking it through carefully for almost 3 full years. The recording itself happened in a small, simple room inside a residential building in Dubai. A plain white wall behind me, basic lighting, a single camera on a stand, the Lebanese man sitting quietly off to one side. The whole process in the end was actually very simple. I wore an ordinary white shirt, no expensive suit, no watch on my wrist. I had not planned out exactly what I would say beforehand. I simply began speaking, and the words came on their own. I said, my name is Farid Bakshari. I have been, for most of my adult life, one of the wealthier men in my country. I built this wealth through hard work, sharp focus, and by caring very little about almost anything except reaching my next goal. I performed every religious duty required of me faithfully. I prayed, I fasted, I gave money generously. I said all the correct words facing the correct direction. And underneath all of it, I was quite possibly the emptiest person I personally knew. I spoke about my father, Reza, and everything he had taught me growing up. About my mother, Nasrin, and her very different kind of faith, the kind that genuinely spoke to someone unseen. About building my businesses and everything it slowly cost my marriages and my relationship with my own children over time. I spoke about Sarah and that midnight phone call and driving alone through the dark to Tehran and realizing on the quiet drive back that I genuinely did not know my own daughter anymore. I spoke about the respected religious teacher in Isfahan and his words about patience and a reward that always seemed to exist somewhere far off in an undefined future, never here, never now. I spoke about the bench near the water in Dubai and a quiet man named Ramon who had very little materially, yet possessed everything that actually mattered. I spoke about the hotel room floor, the sudden warmth, the quiet inner sense of being spoken to, and what it felt like to finally receive something I did not even fully realize I had been starving for my whole life. I spoke about our small house group in Isfahan, about Vartan and the small rotating group of people meeting quietly in changing apartments, phones always left safely in another room, about reading that thin paper New Testament tucked inside a plain notebook cover, about quietly funding help for families who had been discovered and urgently needed to move. And then I said the thing I knew would permanently end the life I had built in Iran, exactly as I had known it until that point. I said, Jesus is the true source of everything I have ever built in this life. Every contract, every deal, every single coin. It all came from him originally. He gave it to me. And he did not give it to me simply so I could build something only for myself, but so I could eventually use it for something far larger than myself alone. I said I spent 50 years believing my wealth came purely from my own hard work, combined with God's favor resting on a properly religious man. But it truly came from Jesus all along. It was always from him. And he waited, with far more patience than I honestly deserved, until I was finally ready to understand that fully. I said, I already know what happens next. I know what happens to my assets remaining in Iran. I know what happens to my name and my reputation there. I know what my remaining family will likely say publicly. I know I cannot simply return home the same way I once left it. I know all of this clearly, and I am telling you anyway, because what Jesus placed inside me cannot be taken away by any government decree, any public family statement, or any frozen bank account. What he placed inside me is permanent, and it is worth far more than everything I am walking away from today. I paused for a long moment. I looked directly into the camera, and I said, to every Iranian watching this right now, to every Muslim lying awake tonight feeling that exact hollow feeling I once felt, that sense of doing everything correctly and still somehow reaching nothing at all, I want you to know something clearly. That feeling exists for a reason. It is not some flaw inside you personally. It is empty space that was originally made for something you simply have not received yet. You were made for an actual relationship, not only a religious system. And that relationship is genuinely available right now, not after you become good enough first, not after you perform enough good deeds first. Right now, exactly as you currently are, wherever you happen to be sitting tonight. The video was released roughly 7 weeks after we recorded it. During those 7 weeks, I had moved very carefully. Some assets I managed to quietly restructure through completely legitimate business channels before anything became public. Some assets I simply left behind entirely. I already knew what would eventually happen to them, and I had genuinely made peace with that outcome beforehand. Once the video became public, everything moved extremely fast. Within 4 days, it had already reached hundreds of thousands of people across various Persian language platforms. Within a week and a half, it had been picked up by several international news organizations covering events inside Iran. The government's official response was exactly what I had expected beforehand. Official statements calling the video completely fabricated, calling me mentally unwell, calling the entire thing foreign interference designed to embarrass the country. My name was even used during Friday sermons in a few different cities, as an example of someone supposedly corrupted by outside enemies. My remaining family released a public statement saying they did not personally know this man, meaning me, meaning they were formally and publicly separating themselves from me for their own protection. I read that statement quietly, alone, and sat with it for a long while afterward. It hurt deeply, of course it did. These were people I genuinely loved, some of them my own close relatives. But I also understood clearly that they were doing exactly what they felt they needed to do, to protect themselves and their own families, and I honestly did not blame them for that decision. What I did not expect, or perhaps what I never allowed myself to fully expect beforehand, because hopping for it felt far too large, was the response that came afterward. The messages started arriving the very same day the video went public. They came through channels the organization had already prepared in advance for exactly this kind of response, mostly in Farsi at first, but also gradually in Arabic, Turkish, and Urdu. They came from inside Iran itself and from Iranians living scattered across the world. They came from people in several other Muslim majority countries as well. People describing dreams they had personally experienced and never told a single soul about before now. Dreams involving a man dressed in white who spoke to them with a kind of gentleness they could never find anywhere in their normal waking life. Young people, older people, women, men, some highly educated people who had spent years deeply studying their own religious tradition already. One message came from a man living in Shiraz who explained he had spent nearly 6 years as a seminary student, training seriously to eventually become a religious cleric himself. He said something inside him had felt quietly wrong for a very long time already. He said the closer he got to the actual center of the religious institution he was training within, the emptier he somehow felt inside. He said he had personally encountered Jesus in a vivid dream almost a year earlier and had been living completely alone with that private knowledge ever since, because he genuinely could not tell a single person in his entire life about it. He said watching my video was the very first moment he felt like he was no longer completely alone in that experience. He said he had quietly said yes to Jesus that same night, right after finishing the video. A woman wrote from a smaller city in northern Iran. She explained she was a school teacher and a mother of 2 young children. She said she had been secretly listening to a Farsi-language Christian radio broadcast through a small hidden radio for almost 3 years already. She said she had privately prayed to Jesus many times over those years, but had never once told anyone, because she genuinely did not know who around her could be trusted safely. She said hearing my name gave her something solid to finally hold onto, that if a man like Farid Bakshari could openly do this, then maybe, just maybe, she could eventually find the courage to do something similar herself one day. These kinds of messages have not really stopped since that day. Honestly, they are still arriving even now. I want to say something simple to close all of this, not really a speech, just something I would say directly to you if we were sitting together right now. I know some of you listening to this are currently living in a situation I understand personally very well. You are somewhere where what you privately believe about Jesus could genuinely cost you something real. Your family relationships, your job, your physical safety, possibly even more than that. I am not going to sit here and tell you it costs absolutely nothing, because it does cost something real. It cost me things I still feel deeply whenever I allow myself to sit and think about them honestly. But I will tell you this clearly. The peace that Jesus placed inside me on that hotel room floor in Dubai is not something I only occasionally remember or feel on particularly good days. It is present when I wake up each morning. It is present when I receive difficult, painful news. It is present even when I quietly think about everything I have left behind permanently. It does not rise and fall along with my outside circumstances. I genuinely never experienced anything remotely like it before. Not once, in 50 years of practicing Islam faithfully, not through all my prayers, fasting, and pilgrimages, not through any business deal I ever closed, and not through any amount of money I ever managed to accumulate. It is real, he is real, and honestly, he is not difficult to find at all. If you are tired right now, if you are carrying something with no clear name, something that quietly weighs on everything you do, if you have already done every correct religious thing you know how to do, and you still feel like you are speaking only to a ceiling above you, I want you to do exactly what I did that night, alone on that floor. Simply say his name quietly. Tell him honestly that you are tired. Tell him you need rest. Tell him you heard about a man from Isfahan who was empty for 50 full years and finally found what he had been searching for on the floor of a quiet hotel room in Dubai. He will answer you too. He answered me. He will genuinely answer you as well.